G'day ladies and gents, and welcome back to War Thunder with Mags, and welcome aboard the Leopard A1A1. And today we're going to be having a little bit of a chat about War Thunder's game mechanics in ground forces, and specifically why the matches play out the way they do, why the current meta is the way it is, and what can be done to improve it. So, before we can get into any of that, what we need to do is actually establish what the meta currently is, the way the matches currently play out. Now, most of you are aware of this, but generally the way it works in War Thunder at the moment is both teams start at the spawn point with their selected vehicles and rush towards the cap circles. They can be either 1 and up to 3 depending on the match layout, and these cap circles become the initial point of engagement. Now, if there is only one cap circle, most of the combined force of both teams will be at the point, in which point one team will overwhelm the other, and from there they will push through to the enemy spawn point and camp them out for the rest of the match. In the case of there being multiple cap points, generally what happens is one cap will be taken, as one force will be more powerful than the other on that particular point. Once that cap is taken, the forces from that point will move on to the next closest point, reinforcing them until the majority of the cap circles are taken. These battles tend to play out a little bit longer overall, but the end result is the same. Eventually one team will gain majority control over the cap circles and will be able to push the enemy back to their spawn, at which point they will be camped at that point. Now, while this isn't true of every single battle that plays out, some manage to last much longer than this and actually have a good sustained battle through the entirety of the match. This is the vast majority of matches in War Thunder. It's exactly what you're going to see on screen in this particular battle. At this point we're at the initial engagement point. I'm using this ravine as a kill zone. I'm going to eliminate a number of tanks within this zone, at which point my team, if you watch the map, will have taken all 3 cap points and we'll combine push through, forcing the enemy back to their spawn point, at which point the match will simply be a waiting game for the ticket counter for the enemy team to finally be eliminated. So why is this common? Well, some will say it's because of the map design, some will say it's because of the mechanics, some will say it's because of imbalances between the vehicles. The truth of the matter is it's a combination of all 3, although vehicles surprisingly play the smallest amount into this particular meta, with the game mechanics themselves being the bulk of the reason behind it. Now, some people may really enjoy this particular style of play, but I personally feel it could be done a lot better and become a lot more interesting with the right changes. So, what are the mechanics that lead up to this particular style of play? Well, first is the respawn system itself and the way it operates. Now, I'm only going to go over this very briefly, as most of the people watching this video, I am sure, are familiar with how ground forces works, but at its core, before you join a match in War Thunder to go into ground forces, you have the option of selecting up to 3 vehicles. These are 3 respawns that will be available to you over the course of the match. This can be any combination of tanks and aircraft, but must include at least 1 tank in order to be able to enter a ground forces match. Assuming that all players put 3 vehicles in their lineup, all players within the match have the same amount of power in terms of respawns. Now, the cap circles on the map are generally held somewhere at the halfway point between the 2 spawn points, and at the start of a match, all players will spawn in their first vehicle, which must be a tank, and will make their way towards those cap points, meaning the initial engagement is generally a fairly level combat playing field, with both teams having an equal number of vehicles making their way to the initial cap points for this first engagement. And the important part to take here is that they move out in a group. Players will move in a group to each cap point, so there are vehicles supporting vehicles. Now, as vehicles are eliminated at each of the cap points, one team will slowly develop an advantage over the other, with the vehicles being eliminated being forced to respawn back at the respawn point. Now, depending on the map size, the travel time between the respawn point and these cap circles can be between 1 and 4 minutes in order to get back into the battle. As a high number of players are eliminated on one side to the other, an advantage builds up at the cap circles, allowing them to be taken, and the respawn vehicles don't respawn back in groups. What this means is that reinforcements coming back to those cap circles are coming in a single vehicle at a time into combat engagement areas that have usually been secured by multiple tanks on the enemy team. This generally leads to an imbalance of power with the second wave of attackers, the reinforcements coming in to try and take the cap circles, against the defenders that have already managed to secure the area and have managed to eliminate tanks in the process. Now, this in itself is not inherently unbalanced. This is more of a tactical issue, because at this point both teams have access to 3 respawns each. If players are smart at this point and group up with other players that are respawning, it is entirely possible for them to be able to push a defender back off the cap circle and make a counterattack. The imbalance in this system is actually caused by the respawn system itself and how it works, specifically around the respawn point system. As you play your first deployed tank or vehicle in War Thunder ground forces, whether that be a tank destroyer, an anti-aircraft gun, it doesn't matter. You earn respawn points for your actions within that vehicle for that initial part of the game. So that is capping, cap circles, non-penetrating hits on enemy vehicles, penetrating hits on enemy vehicles, the destruction of enemy vehicles, and for successfully managing to take hits yourself without being destroyed. Now, at the start of the match, you are given a small pool of points to begin with. These points are enough to deploy a single vehicle of your choice up to the battle rating that you are playing in, excluding aircraft, which are more expensive than the points value that you are actually given. However, these points are usually only enough to deploy a single vehicle. You will need to perform those actions within the match in order to get enough points to get your second respawn out. Here's where the imbalance lies. If your tank is destroyed by a single shot without having fired its gun, by an ambushing tank, as you saw me do in the Leopard at the start of this match, you won't have enough points to bring a second vehicle in, so your remaining respawns are completely moved from the game. Now what this means is, if you go back to what I said initially, the spawn point system means that you have access to 3 vehicles per player for every player on your team. Well, that initial shot that wipes out that first player's tank before he earns enough points to be able to get his second respawn doesn't actually kill one vehicle, it kills all 3 that he has access to within the match, removing 3 vehicles from your team's potential every shot fired. At the start of this match, you saw me wipe out 3 vehicles very quickly. 3 vehicles in 3 minutes. Well, none of these 3 players actually had enough points to deploy a second vehicle onto the field after I killed them. In that 3 minutes, I actually wiped out 9 of the team's potential respawns. Now this in itself unbalances the match. However, while killing those vehicles, I also personally earned enough respawn points to deploy my second vehicle, while my first vehicle was still active in the fight, and almost enough to deploy my aircraft as well. So let's assume for a moment that I actually earned enough points in that battle to deploy both of my 2 remaining respawns. In that 3 minutes, the enemy team lost 3 active tanks, 6 potential respawns, but my team gained 2 additional respawns on top of keeping my tanks still in the battle. And this particular situation played out multiple times across each of these 3 cap zones, with at least 2 other players scoring just as well as I did in those first few minutes of the match. This of course generated a snowball effect. This is where one team starts to build power and will continually build power while the opposing team is continually losing it, to the point where it's impossible to make that turn back. Within the first 5 minutes of this match, more than 50% of the enemy team's potential respawns had been eliminated on the initial battle. Those few that did earn enough points to actually be able to get their respawns out were caught in the open attempting to approach the cap circles by the forces that had already managed to take them and had already bought themselves an advantage, and were eliminated in engagements that were generally 2 to 3 versus 1, wiping out the remaining of the enemy force. Within 7 minutes of match start, the enemy team only had 4 players remaining in total. Now, if this was an odd match, it wouldn't be too much of an issue, but this, as I said at the start, is the vast majority of the way things go. The speed that it plays out at will vary based on the battle rating of the ground forces match being played, with higher battle rating matches such as 8.0 Leopard A1 matches tending to occur or play out faster than lower tier matches, due to the vehicles involved having very little in the way of defense but extremely high levels of offense. In this particular battle rating, one-shot kills are almost the norm, leading to players that actually lose their vehicles having very little chance to be able to build up a point score based on ricochets or bounces, and as such being far less likely to be able to deploy their second respawn into the match to begin with. So this is the first problem with the meta, and it's actually the way this respawn point system works. Now, originally when Ground Forces was first being rolled out, there was a time when there wasn't actually a respawn point system in place. It was actually added due to aircraft, not tanks. Originally, players had 3 respawns that they could deploy on the battlefield, but there was no point system involved, so when you lost a vehicle, you were able to immediately redeploy a second vehicle onto the battlefield. However, this applied to aircraft as well, and what was noticed almost straight away is players would deploy bombers almost immediately onto the battlefield to carpet bomb the enemy spawn point just seconds into the match, eliminating the highest number of tanks that they possibly could. These battles just tended to evolve into giant bomber wars, so the spawn point system was introduced in order to prevent that from happening, forcing a player to do a certain amount of work on the ground before earning his right to deploy a bomber into the battle. So, having gone through that slightly longer than planned explanation for how the mechanics for the spawn system in War Thunder Ground Forces works, what would be my fix? Well, the fix would actually be rather simple. I would make the respawn point system only apply to aircraft and not tanks. That is to say, at the start of the match you get the option of choosing 3 vehicles in any combination that you choose. and one of these vehicles must be a tank. Should your initially deployed tank be eliminated before it can earn any respawn points, you would be able to use the second tank in your lineup and immediately deploy it and begin moving it back into the battle, but you would not be able to deploy a plane without having first earned a certain number of respawn points in order to earn that right. If a player chooses to forgo having access to an aircraft in the match, he could bring 3 tanks into the battlefield, and these 3 tanks would be able to be respawned independent of the spawn point system. This would keep a larger number of players in the match for a longer period of time, reduce the punishment on a potential unlucky hit very early on in the match, while simultaneously limiting players' abilities to mass deploy aircraft and carpet bomb the enemy into oblivion. The side effect of this is it would also reduce spawn camping, as at this point, every player now has the ability to put at least 1 second tank onto the battlefield. So should that initial engagement be very one-sided and the 1, 2, potentially 3 cap circles be taken by one team very quickly, immediately rushing the spawn following those cap circles being taken would actually be a very bad mistake, because the entire enemy team at that point should have been able to respawn and will be based somewhere between the respawn point and those cap circles, leading to an entire second force that would need to be engaged. At that point, a defensive cordon would have to be formed around the cap circles themselves, and a second assault on these cap circles could take place, leading to at least 2 major pitched battles in every single match that you play, rather than just the initial one that you tend to find at the moment. This of course prevents the snowball that I discussed before from actually forming to begin with, and also allows the opportunity for potential comebacks that currently don't really exist in the way that War Thunder Ground Forces play out most of the time. Of course, the respawn mechanics, while being a major part, as I said earlier on, is only one part for the way the meta is currently established. I'm going to call this video here, as this particular discussion on this portion of the Ground Forces meta has gone on for a little bit longer than I was anticipating. And the next part I want to discuss, which is map and mission design, is probably going to be a fairly lengthy discussion as well. So I will be doing that video in the next couple of days. Anyways, ladies and gents, I hope you enjoyed the video. Remember to click that like button, subscribe if you want to see more, and until next time, drive smart, drive safe, and I will catch you on the battlefield.